The sun dips below the horizon by mid-afternoon, leaving you in a world of biting blue shadows and piercing cold. You step through the heavy wooden door of your small cruck cottage, seeking any refuge from the howling gale that whips across the frozen fields of Europe in the 14th century. Inside, the air is thick with the stinging scent of wood smoke and the damp musk of livestock huddled at the far end of the single room. Your breath hangs in the air like a ghost. There are no glass windows here, only shutters and thick pelts to keep the frost at bay. As you move toward the glowing embers of the central hearth, you realize that for you, winter is not a season of holiday cheer. It is a calculated battle for survival that will last until the first thaw of spring. Imagine you are standing at the edge of a vast, open field in the middle of November. The year is 1350. The sun is a pale, watery disk hanging low in the southern sky, providing light but almost no warmth. You can feel the dampness of the earth seeping through your leather-turned shoes, which are worn thin from months of labor. Every time you exhale, a thick cloud of white mist blooms in front of your face before being snatched away by a biting northern wind. This wind is different from the cooling breezes of summer. It has a sharp, metallic edge to it, a warning that the great white silence of winter is only days away. For you and your fellow villagers, this is not just a change in the weather. It is the beginning of the most dangerous season of the year. In the medieval world, winter is a predatory force. It is something that must be outrun, outsmarted, and outlasted. Your survival depends entirely on what you have managed to pull from the ground and store away over the last few weeks. As you look around the village, you see a frenzy of activity. There is no time for rest, no time for leisure. Every hour of daylight is a precious commodity. This is the last harvest, and it is a desperate race against the frost. Your focus is currently on the grain. In your world, grain is life. It is the foundation of every meal, the currency you use to pay your taxes, and the seed for next year's hope. You bend your back, the muscles screaming in protest, as you help haul the final sheaves of rye and barley toward the great communal barn. The air here smells of dry straw, dust, and the underlying scent of damp earth. You have been working since long before the sun rose, using a wooden rake to gather the stray stalks left behind by the reapers. Nothing can be wasted. Every single head of grain that falls into the mud is a mouthful of bread lost for February. The urgency is driven by a terrifying reality. If the heavy rains come before the grain is safely under a roof, the moisture will settle into the stacks. Within days, the grain will begin to sprout, or worse, it will rot. There is a specific horror known to your people called ergot, a dark fungus that grows on damp rye. If you are forced to eat bread made from tainted grain, it will bring on the burning sickness, causing hallucinations and even the loss of limbs. So you work through the pain. You work until your hands are raw and your vision blurs. You must get the harvest in before the sky turns the color of lead and releases the first killing sleet. As the grain is secured, the soundscape of the village changes. You hear the rhythmic, heavy thud of wooden flails beating against the stone floor of the barn. This is the threshing, the long and exhausting process of separating the edible grain from the useless chaff. Men and women stand in pairs, swinging their flails in a carefully timed dance. Thud, thud, thud. The air becomes thick with fine golden dust that gets into your eyes and lungs, making you cough. But as the piles of clean grain grow, the heavy knot of anxiety in your stomach loosens just a little bit. While the grain is being processed, another crucial and far more visceral task is taking place near the center of the village. You smell it before you see it, the sharp, copper scent of blood mixed with the heavy aroma of wood smoke. This is the time of the great culling. You walk past the pens where the livestock are kept and see the difficult choices being made by your neighbors. In a world without refrigerated transport or industrial feed, you cannot keep all your animals alive through the winter. There simply is not enough hay to go around. A cow or a pig that cannot be fed will only starve to death by January, and a starved animal provides no meat. You watch as the village elders point out which animals will be kept for breeding and which must be sacrificed now. It is a grim business. You help hold down a squealing hog as the butcher performs his work. This is not done out of cruelty, but out of a harsh mathematical necessity. Every part of the animal is used. The blood is caught in wooden bowls to be mixed with fat and grain for black puddings. The intestines are cleaned for sausage casings. The bladder is saved to be dried and used as a window pane or a toy for the children. The preservation of this meat is your next great challenge. You do not have the luxury of ice. Instead, you rely on the ancient magic of salt and smoke. You spend hours in the small, soot-stained lean-to at the back of your cottage, rubbing coarse gray salt into slabs of pork. Salt is expensive, often costing a significant portion of a family's meager earnings. But without it, the meat will spoil and your family will face the winter without protein. You hang the salted joints from the rafters, where the smoke from the central hearth will slowly cure them over the coming weeks. The sight of those hams swaying in the rafters is your primary insurance policy against the hunger. Beyond the meat and the grain, you must also look to your garden. You spend an afternoon kneeling in the cold mud, digging up the last of the root vegetables. Leeks, onions, and especially turnips are your treasures today. You do not just pull them up and leave them in a basket. You have dug a deep pit in the earth, lined with dry straw. This is your root cellar. You carefully layer the turnips and carrots in the straw and cover them with a thick mound of soil. The earth itself will act as an insulator, keeping the vegetables just above freezing so they remain crisp and edible until the spring. If you get this wrong, if the frost reaches them, they will turn into a mushy, rotten mess that even the pigs will not eat. As the afternoon light begins to fail, you turn your attention to the house itself. You look up at the thatched roof of your longhouse. It has been a rainy autumn, and you can see a few spots where the straw has thinned. You climb a shaky ladder with a bundle of fresh reeds to patch the holes. You know that a single leak can be a death sentence in a blizzard. A wet bed leads to a chill, and a chill leads to the pining sickness, the coughing that carries away so many of the young and the old when the snow is deep. You then move to the walls, which are made of wattle and daub, a mixture of woven sticks and a plaster of mud, straw, and manure. The summer heat has caused the mud to crack. You take a bucket of fresh, wet clay and begin to smear it into every crevice. You are sealing your world shut. You are creating a barrier between your family and the hungry wind that is already beginning to howl through the nearby forest. You feel the grit of the clay under your fingernails and the cold mud on your skin. But you do not stop until you are sure the house is airtight. Finally, there is the matter of fuel. You look at the woodpile stacked against the side of the house. It looks large, but you know how quickly the hearth devours logs when the temperature drops below freezing. You spend the remaining hour of twilight heading toward the edge of the woods to gather one last load of fallen branches and brushwood. You are careful not to go too deep into the trees. In the winter, the woods are a place of shadows and predators. You have heard the stories of wolves driven by hunger to the very doors of the village. You gather what you can, the dead wood snapping like bone under your feet, and haul it back to the safety of the clearing. By the time you return, the sun has vanished completely. The stars are beginning to prick through the darkening veil of the sky, looking like shards of ice. You walk into your home and the smell of the day follows you. The salt, the blood, the dust, and the damp earth. Your body is heavy with an exhaustion that goes deeper than the skin, reaching into your very marrow. You look at the full bins of grain, the salted meat in the rafters, and the mounded earth over the root pit. You have done everything you can. The race is over. The frost has arrived, turning the puddles in the path into jagged glass. You pull the heavy wooden door shut and drop the latch. The world outside is turning white, but for tonight you have survived the last harvest. You stand in the center of your small, dim cottage, and for the first time in months, the frantic pace of the fields has slowed. But this is no time for rest. The air around you is changing. The crisp, clean scent of autumn is being replaced by something sharper, something heavier. It is the smell of survival. If the harvest was the gathering of life, the weeks that follow are a desperate race to stop time itself. You look at the piles of grain, the baskets of apples, and the heavy carcasses of livestock, and you know that left to their own devices, they will rot within days. To survive the coming months, you must become a master of chemistry, a guardian against decay. You must use salt, smoke, and the very earth beneath your feet to lock the summer away in jars and barrels. Look down at your hands. They are stained with the dark juices of berries and the gray grit of salt. Your fingernails are rimmed with the earth you have been digging all morning. This is the work of preservation, and it is the most vital skill you possess. Without it, you are a dead man walking by midwinter. You begin with the most precious commodity of all, salt. In your world, salt is not just a seasoning. It is white gold. It is a crystalline miracle that pulls the moisture out of flesh, creating an environment where the bacteria of rot simply cannot breathe. But salt is expensive. You have spent weeks of labor or traded your best wool to secure enough of it. You reach into a heavy cloth sack and pull out a handful of the coarse, gray grains. Feels like sand between your fingers. You approach the heavy wooden trough where the butchered remains of a hog lie waiting. This is the centerpiece of your winter larder. You do not sprinkle the salt like a modern chef. You rub it. You lean your weight into the meat, massaging the crystals deep into the muscle and around the bone. Your muscles ache as you work the salt into every crevice. If you miss a single spot, a pocket of air or moisture will remain, and by February, the entire ham will be a putrid green ruin. You are fighting an invisible war against the damp, and salt is your primary weapon. Once the meat is thoroughly coated, you layer it into a barrel, packing more salt between each cut. Over the coming days, a thick, salty brine will form, a liquid tune that keeps the meat safe from the air. This is the art of the pickling barrel. But salt alone is not enough for everything. Some things require the touch of the fire. You look up at the ceiling of your home. There is no chimney here, only a hole in the thatch or perhaps just the porous reeds of the roof themselves. The air in the upper reaches of the house is thick and hazy with the constant drift of wood smoke from the central hearth. This is not a nuisance. It is a tool. You climb a shaky wooden ladder, your eyes stinging from the peat smoke, and begin to hang long strips of beef and heavy loops of sausage from the rafters. The smoke rises, wrapping the meat in an aromatic shroud. It deposits a layer of phenols and acids onto the surface of the food, creating a chemical barrier that insects and mold despise. Day after day, the meat hangs there, slowly drying, slowly darkening until it looks like weathered wood. It becomes tough, leathery, and incredibly concentrated in flavor. When the blizzards howl outside and your stomach growls with a hollow ache, You will shave off thin slivers of this smoked bounty to drop into a pot of boiling water. It will be the only thing that tastes of salt and life in the dead of January. But the animals are only half the battle. You turn your attention to the vegetables. You have baskets of turnips, parsnips, and carrots, their greens already wilting. You cannot leave them in the open air, for the frost will turn them into mush. Instead, you go outside and begin to dig. You are creating a clamp, a primitive but effective earth refrigerator. You dig a shallow pit in a well-drained spot and line it with a thick bed of dry straw. You carefully arrange your root vegetables in a conical pile, making sure they do not touch each other more than necessary. Then, you cover them with another thick layer of straw and a heavy mound of soil, patting it down with the back of your spade until it looks like a burial mound. In a way, it is. You are burying your food so that it might stay alive. The earth will insulate the roots, keeping them just above freezing and just moist enough to prevent them from shriveling. When the ground is frozen hard as iron, you will come out here with a pickaxe to break through the crust and retrieve a few precious carrots for the evening pottage. Nearby, you have your crocks of silage and fermented greens. This is where the magic of the sour happens. You have taken heads of cabbage and shredded them fine with a sharp knife, mixing them with a little of your precious salt. You have packed them into stoneware jars, pounding them down with a heavy wooden pestle until the juices rise up to cover the leaves. You place a heavy stone on top to keep the cabbage submerged. Over the next few weeks, something wonderful happens. Tiny organisms, far too small for you to see, begin to eat the sugars in the cabbage, producing acid that preserves the vegetable and gives it a sharp, tangy bite. You do not understand the science of fermentation, but you know the result. This soured cabbage will provide the vitamin C that keeps your teeth from falling out and your skin from bruising when the fresh greens are gone. It is a sour, pungent lifeline. Then there is the grain, the foundation of your entire existence. You have spent the last month threshing and winnowing, separating the wheat and rye from the chaff. Now it sits in heavy sacks and wooden bins. But the grain is under constant assault. You listen closely and you can hear the scratching of tiny paws. Mice and rats are the shadows of the medieval winter, and they are as hungry as you are. You have built your grain bins on raised legs, capped with flat stones that the rodents cannot climb. You keep a lean, half-wild cat in the barn, a small predator who is your best ally in this struggle. But there is a darker threat than mice. If the grain gets damp, a black fungus called ergot can grow. If you grind that fungus into your flour and bake it into your bread, your family will suffer from terrible hallucinations, burning pain in their limbs, and eventually, death. You run your hands through the grain, feeling for any dampness, sniffing for the musty scent of mold. You must keep it dry. You must keep it clean. Your life depends on the integrity of these seeds. You look around your small home, now crowded with the tools of preservation. There are jars of honey, the only sweetener you know, used to preserve fruits like pears and plums. There are jugs of ale, liquid bread that will provide calories and hydration when the water in the well is suspect. Every corner is filled. Every rafter is weighed down. The transition from the bounty of the harvest to the lean reality of winter is a psychological burden as much as a physical one. As you seal the last barrel of salted pork and pat the last mound of the earth clamp, you feel a heavy sense of finality. This is all you have. There will be no more growth until the sun returns in the spring. Every meal you eat is a withdrawal from a bank account that has no more deposits coming in. You wipe the grease and salt from your hands onto your woolen tunic. The sun is setting earlier now, a pale, weak light that barely warms the air. The work of the fields is done, and the work of the pantry is nearing its end. You have fought against the rot, the mold, and the scavengers. You have used the ancient secrets of salt and smoke to transform the perishable into the permanent. You stand in the doorway of your cottage and look out at the darkening village. You can see the smoke rising from your neighbors' roofs, a dozen thin pillars of gray against the purple sky. You know they are doing the same thing, huddling over their hearths, hanging their meats, and burying their roots. There is a communal tension in the air, a shared understanding that the easy days are over. But as you turn back inside and feel the warmth of the central fire, you feel a grim sense of satisfaction. The larder is full. The jars are sealed. The meat is darkening in the rafters. You have done everything a human can do to prepare for the long silence of the frost. The art of preservation is complete. Now, you must learn the art of enduring. The world outside is growing cold and still, and the true test of your preparations is about to begin. You step across the threshold, and the first thing that hits you is the weight of the air. It is thick, heavy with the scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and the pungent, unmistakable musk of living creatures. Outside, the wind is a whetted blade, searching for any gap in your defenses. But here, inside your cottage, the world changes. You are no longer standing in a mere building. You are standing inside a carefully crafted vessel of survival, a shell designed to keep the spark of life flickering through the long, dark months of the medieval winter. To an outsider from another time, this place might look like a hovel, a primitive shack made of mud and sticks. But as the temperature drops below freezing and the snow begins to pile against the door, you know better. You know that every inch of these walls has been engineered by necessity and refined by centuries of trial and error. You turn your attention to the walls themselves. They are not made of stone, for stone is cold and weeps moisture when the frost bites. They are not made of solid timber planks, which are expensive and prone to warping, leaving gaps where the wind can whistle through. Instead, your home is built of wattle and daub. You can feel the heartbeat of the forest in the bones of the house. You remember the weeks spent in the late autumn, weaving flexible branches of hazel, willow, or oak through upright wooden stakes called staves. This is the wattle, a sturdy, springy lattice that forms the skeleton of your shelter. It is a craft of patience, bending the wood without breaking it, ensuring the weave is tight enough to hold the weight of what comes next. That next step is the daub, and it is perhaps the most important secret to your survival. You can still feel the memory of it under your fingernails. Daub is a primal recipe, a mixture of the very earth you walk upon. You spent days treading a mixture of wet clay, soil, and fine straw into a thick, sticky paste. But there is a secret ingredient that makes this more than just mud. You added a generous amount of animal dung, usually from your own cattle or sheep. To you, this is not a matter of filth, it is a matter of chemistry. The dung contains digestive fibers and ammonia that, when dried, create a remarkably durable, plastic-like bond. It acts as a natural resin, preventing the clay from cracking as it shrinks. You remember the labor of smearing this mixture onto the wattle frame. You used your bare hands and flat wooden boards to pack it tight, forcing the mud into every crevice of the woven sticks. You applied it in layers, building up a thickness that can withstand a gale. As it dried, it became a solid, airtight barrier. In the summer, it kept the interior cool, but now, in the depths of winter, it performs its most vital function. Traps the heat. Unlike a thin wooden wall, these thick, dense mounds of earth and fiber have a high thermal mass. They soak up the warmth from the central fire and radiate it back into the room long after the flames have died down to embers. You run your hand along the interior surface. It feels surprisingly smooth, though lumpy in places. You have coated the daub with a thin layer of lime wash. This white coating does more than just brighten the dim interior by reflecting the meager light of the fire. It is a shield. Lime is alkaline, which means it helps to discourage pests and prevents the growth of mold in the damp winter air. It seals the wall, giving it a final, breathable skin. But the walls are only half the battle. You look up into the shadows of the roof. There is no ceiling here, only the underside of the thatch, rising up into a dark, soot-stained peak. This is your primary defense against the sky. While a modern roof might be designed to shed water quickly, your thatched roof is a thick, porous sponge designed to trap air. You spent days hauling bundles of water reeds or long wheat straw up a ladder. You laid them in overlapping layers, sometimes over a foot thick, pinning them down with hazel rods. This thatch is a masterpiece of insulation. Within those thousands of hollow stems, millions of tiny pockets of air are trapped. This dead air space is what keeps the warmth of the cottage from escaping into the freezing night. On a night like tonight, when the frost is thick enough to snap branches in the woods, you can hear the wind howling over the ridge of the roof, but you do not feel it. The thatch swallows the sound and the cold, acting as a heavy woolen blanket pulled tight over the shoulders of the house. However, the roof has another, more subtle job. You notice the way the smoke from the central hearth rises in lazy, blue coils. There is no chimney in your cottage. A chimney would be a disaster for you in a medieval winter. It would act like a giant straw, sucking all your precious warm air up and out into the sky. Instead, you have only a small hole in the gable end, or perhaps no hole at all, allowing the smoke to simply filter slowly through the thatch itself. You might cough as the air grows hazy, but you value this smoke. As it permeates the straw of the roof, it coats every fiber in a layer of soot and creosote. This serves as a natural pesticide, killing the beetles and rodents that would otherwise make a meal of your ceiling. More importantly, the smoke helps to preserve the thatch, making it more water-resistant and durable. The smoke also hangs in a thick layer just below the rafters, creating a thermal barrier that reflects heat back down toward the floor where you sit. The higher you go in the cottage, the warmer and more suffocating it becomes. You have learned to live your life in the bottom 4 feet of the room, where the air is clearest and the warmth is most consistent. The floor beneath your feet is another layer of this insulation puzzle. It is made of packed earth, but you have not left it bare. You have strewn it with a thick layer of rushes and dry straw. This acts as a rudimentary carpet, keeping your feet from the soul-chilling cold of the ground. Mixed into these rushes are dried herbs like meadowsweet or lavender, which release a faint, sweet scent when stepped upon, masking the heavier odors of the winter. You move toward the back of the cottage, past the central hearth, and you hear a soft, rhythmic sound. It is the sound of heavy breathing and the occasional rustle of straw. Here, separated from your sleeping area by only a low wooden partition or a screen of woven branches, are your animals. You have brought your 2 cows and your few remaining sheep inside for the winter. This is not just to keep them safe from wolves or the elements. It is a calculated move for your own survival. An adult cow is a massive organic heater. It produces an incredible amount of body heat, and in the confined space of the cottage, that heat is a life-saving resource. You share your living space with them, accepting the smell and the noise in exchange for the warmth they radiate. Their presence raises the temperature of the room by several degrees, enough to make the difference between a night of shivering misery and a night of restorative sleep. You are part of a closed thermal loop. You feed them the hay you gathered in the summer, and in return, they provide you with heat and the promise of milk and manure for the coming spring. You look around your small, dim world. The flickering light of the fire casts long, dancing shadows against the whitewashed walls. You can hear the snow clicking against the small, horn-covered window, a translucent pane made of scraped oxhorn that lets in a ghostly, amber light but keeps the draft out. Every element of this space, from the dung in the walls to the animals in the corner, is a piece of a singular strategy. You are living inside a machine made of mud, straw, and breath. It is a claustrophobic existence, certainly. You will spend much of the next 3 months in this hazy, smoke-filled room. Your eyes will sting, and your clothes will carry the scent of the hearth for the rest of your life. But as you listen to the fury of the winter storm outside, a storm that would kill an unprotected man in a matter of hours, you feel a sense of profound security. The wattle holds, the daub remains firm, and the thatch stands thick against the ice. Your ancestors survived this way, and through the secrets of the earth and the heat of the herd, you will survive too. The world outside is a frozen wasteland, but here, within these thick, pungent walls, the fire is still burning. You take a tentative step deeper into the shadows of the longhouse, and the first thing that hits you is not the cold, but a wall of thick, humid air. It is a staggering contrast to the dry, biting frost you just left behind at the threshold. This air has weight. It carries a complex, overwhelming bouquet of damp straw, wood smoke, unwashed wool, and the unmistakable Swedish musk of large herbivorous bodies. As your eyes begin to adjust to the flickering amber light of the central hearth, you realize that you are not alone in this narrow, rectangular world. To your left, just beyond a low wooden partition or perhaps nothing more than a change in the floor texture, a massive shadow shifts. There is a low, vibrating hum that seems to resonate in the very soles of your feet, followed by a heavy, wet snort. You are standing in a medieval byre dwelling, and you are currently sharing your living room with several hundred pounds of living, breathing muscle. In the modern world, we go to great lengths to separate our domestic lives from the natural world. We have fences, sealed windows, and sterilized surfaces. But for you, a peasant in the 14th century, such a separation would be a death sentence. To survive the brutal core of winter, you must embrace a radical form of communal living. You are part of a multi-species collective. This longhouse is a machine for survival, and every creature within its walls is a vital component. You walk further in, your boots crunching on a mixture of dried rushes and old straw. The layout is simple but ingenious. The house is a long rectangle, usually built with low stone walls and a towering, steep roof of thick thatch. One end of the building is for you and your family, centered around the open fire. The other end, often separated by a simple wooden screen or a narrow cross passage, is the byre. This is where the livestock spend their winter. You look toward the darkness of the far end. There, tethered to the walls or standing in narrow stalls, are the family's most precious earthly possessions. An ox, his coat shaggy and matted with winter hair, turns his great head toward you. His eyes catch the firelight, glowing like 2 polished agates. Next to him, perhaps 2 or 3 hardy cows huddle together, their sides touching. They are not the massive, bloated breeds you might see in a modern industrial farm. They are smaller, leaner, and incredibly tough. But even at this size, they are biological furnaces. This is the secret to your survival. A single cow produces roughly the same amount of heat as a small electric space heater, around 500 to 700 watts of continuous thermal energy. When you pack 4 or 5 of these animals into a confined, insulated space, the ambient temperature rises significantly. They are your living radiators. They consume the hay you spent your entire summer scything and drying, and in return, they keep the air inside this house well above the freezing point, even when the world outside is buried under 3 feet of snow. The heat they generate is a moist, heavy warmth. It rises from their flanks in visible plumes of steam that drift toward the rafters. This humidity is actually a blessing in disguise. It helps to keep the thatch of the roof from becoming too brittle and dry, and it provides a strange sort of comfort against the parching, wind-driven cold of the exterior. You find yourself gravitating toward the partition. There is a psychological comfort here that is hard to describe. In the silence of a winter night, when the wind is screaming through the eaves and the timber frame of the house groans under the weight of the snow, the sound of the animals is a lullaby. You hear the rhythmic, grinding sound of the ox chewing his cud. You hear the occasional clatter of a hoof against stone and the soft, rhythmic breathing of creatures that are remarkably calm. Their presence is a constant reminder that life is still holding on. But this cohabitation is not just about warmth. It is about security. In these lean months, a cow or an ox is more than just an animal. It is the difference between prosperity and starvation in the coming year. If a wolf were to break into an outside shed, or if a band of desperate marauders were to come through the village in the dead of night, you would never hear them until it was too late. But here, with the animals just 10 feet away from your sleeping mat, you are their guardian, and they are your alarm system. If a stranger approaches the door, the animals will sense it long before you do. They will shift, low, and kick at their stalls, waking you from your slumber. In the medieval mind, the line between the human world and the animal world is porous. You live with them, you smell like them, and your fates are inextricably linked. As you move through the house, you notice the floor. In the human end, the earth is packed hard and covered with fresh herbs or straw. But as you move toward the buyer, the floor begins to slope downward. This is a deliberate piece of engineering. At the very end of the building, there is often a small hole in the wall or a drainage trench. This allows the liquid waste from the animals to flow away from the living quarters. However, the solid manure is often allowed to accumulate over the winter, layered with fresh straw to keep the animals relatively dry. To a modern nose, the thought is revolting. To you, however, that pile of muck is gold. It is fermenting, and that fermentation process generates even more heat, contributing to the overall warmth of the longhouse. More importantly, it is the fertilizer that will nourish your fields in the spring. You are living inside a compost heap, a barn, and a bedroom all at once. You look up into the rafters, where the smoke from the central hearth hangs in a thick, gray veil before seeping through the thatch. Perched on the crossbeams, just above the warmth of the fire, are the chickens. They are small, scrappy birds, more like pheasants than modern hens. They are here for the same reason you are. If left outside, their feet would freeze and they would fall prey to foxes. Here, they stay warm, and in the dim light of the morning, they might even provide a rare, precious egg. They also serve as a primitive form of pest control, snapping up any insects that might be stirred into activity by the warmth of the house. Even the family pig might have a corner near the door, tucked into a small pen or simply tethered. The pig is the ultimate recycler, turning the scraps of your meager winter meals into fat and protein for the future. The intimacy of this arrangement defines your daily rhythm. Every morning, before you even think of breaking your own fast, you must tend to the guests. You move among them in the dim light, checking their water, shaking out fresh straw, and talking to them in low, soothing tones. You know the individual temperaments of each cow. You know which one is prone to kicking and which one will lean her heavy head against your shoulder as you work. This is not the clinical relationship of a modern farmer to his stock. This is a deep, ancient bond of mutual dependence. You provide them with the sun's energy stored in hay. They provide you with the warmth of their bodies and the promise of labor when the soil thaws. There is, of course, a darker side to this proximity. Living so closely with livestock means you are constantly exposed to their parasites and diseases. Mites, lice, and fleas jump easily from the hide of an ox to the woolen tunic of a child. The air is thick with dust from the straw and the dander of the animals, which can lead to persistent coughs. But in the 14th century, you do not think of germs or hygiene in the way a modern person does. You think of the cold. The cold is the great predator, the invisible monster that waits outside the door to snatch the breath from your lungs. Compared to the threat of freezing to death in your sleep, the smell of manure and the itch of a few fleas are a very small price to pay. As the evening wears on, the family gathers near the hearth, but the presence of the animals remains a constant backdrop. Their shadows dance on the far walls, cast by the dying embers of the fire. You sit on a low stool, the warmth of the ox drifting over the partition like a physical blanket. In this moment, the longhouse feels less like a primitive shack and more like a fortress. It is a bastion of life in a season of death. The shared breath of man and beast creates a microclimate that defies the natural order of the winter. You are part of a closed loop, a small, humming ecosystem where nothing is wasted and every spark of heat is cherished. You realize that for the medieval peasant, the winter is not a time of loneliness. You are never truly alone. Even if you were the only human in the house, you would be surrounded by the vital, pulsing energy of the herd. Their hearts beat slower than yours in the dark, their massive lungs moving the air in a slow, steady tide. As you prepare to lay down on your own bed of straw near the fire, you hear one last, deep sigh from the byre. It is the sound of a 1,000-pound animal settling in for the night. You pull your cloak tight and close your eyes, drifting off to sleep to the sound of chewing and the comforting, heavy scent of the shared hearth. The winter may be brutal, and the frost may be thick on the stones outside, but inside these walls, the warmth of the living is enough to see you through to the dawn. You pull your knees to your chest, feeling the sharp bite of the morning air against your skin. The fire has burned low, and the shared warmth of the communal bed is quickly fading as your family begins to stir. Now, your survival depends on the layers you wrap around your body. This is not about style or status. This is about building a portable fortress of fiber and fat. You reach for your first layer, the linen shift, which has been your constant companion throughout the year. It is thin and worn, but it is the essential barrier between your skin and the heavy wool that will follow. The medieval winter wardrobe is a testament to human ingenuity and months of repetitive labor. Every thread you wear was once part of a plant or an animal that lived on this very land. As you pull the linen tunic over your head, you feel the familiar scratch of the fabric. Linen comes from the flax plant, and processing it is a grueling task. It involves soaking the stalks until they rot, beating them until the fibers loosen, and then combing those fibers into a soft, pale gold mass. Your mother and sisters spent the long evenings of summer spinning this flax into thread, their fingers never resting even as they talked or listened to stories. This linen layer is vital because it absorbs the sweat of your labor, keeping it away from your skin so you do not catch a chill when you finally stop moving. But linen alone is no match for the frost that is currently turning the puddles outside into sheets of gray glass. For heat, you must turn to the sheep. You reach for your woolen tunic, and the weight of it is comforting. It is thick and dense, smelling faintly of the earth and the animal it came from. In the medieval world, wool is the king of fabrics. It is a miracle of nature that can keep you warm even when it is soaking wet. This is because wool fibers are naturally crimped, creating tiny pockets of air that trap your body heat. Furthermore, the wool has not been overly cleaned. It still contains some of its natural lanolin, a waxy grease that makes the garment water resistant. As you slide your arms into the sleeves, you feel the heft of the cloth. This was likely woven on a vertical loom right here in the village, the threads packed tight to keep the wind from whistling through the weave. Next come the hose. You do not wear trousers in the way a modern person might imagine. Instead, you have two separate woolen tubes that cover your legs, reaching from your ankles to your upper thighs. You pull them on one at a time and secure them with linen cords to a belt hidden beneath your tunic. These hose are often the first thing to get wet when you walk through the snow, so they are made of the toughest, most tightly spun wool available. You might even wear two pairs if the temperature has dropped low enough to freeze the ale in its vat. Over these, you wrap strips of cloth called leg bindings, winding them from your ankle to just below the knee. These act like primitive gaiters, providing extra insulation and preventing the snow from creeping up into your hose. Now you must protect your core. You pull on a secondary tunic, perhaps one that has been reinforced with a lining of cheaper wool or even rabbit fur if your father had luck with his traps in the autumn. This layering system is your primary defense. By wearing multiple thinner garments rather than one massive coat, you trap layers of air between each piece of clothing. This is the same principle used by modern hikers, and it is the only thing that stands between you and hypothermia when you are out in the fields gathering firewood. But the most important piece of your winter armor is the hood. You reach for it now, a heavy woolen cowl that covers your shoulders and wraps snugly around your head. This is the chaperone, and it is a masterpiece of functional design. The hood features a long tail of fabric called a liripipe. You can wrap this tail around your throat like a scarf or use it to tie the hood tight against your face when the wind begins to howl. Unlike a modern hat that leaves your neck exposed, this hood creates a seamless seal of warmth from your chest to your brow. You feel the immediate change in your body temperature as you pull it on. The heat that was escaping from your head is now held close to your skin. Your hands are next. You do not have the fine leather gloves of a nobleman. Instead, you have simple mittens made of felted wool. Felting is a process where wool is agitated with heat and water until the fibers interlock into a dense, matted sheet. It is nearly windproof and highly durable. These mittens might be connected by a string that runs through your sleeves, a humble precursor to the strings used for children's mittens today, ensuring that if you must pull them off to perform a delicate task, they will not be lost in the snow. Finally, you must address your feet. This is where the battle against winter is often lost. Most peasants wear turn shoes, which are simple leather shoes sewn inside out and then turned right side out to hide the seams. The leather is thin, often no thicker than a few stacked coins. On their own, these shoes would be useless against the frozen mud. To survive, you must transform them. You take a handful of dried straw or soft moss and stuff it into the bottom of the shoes. This creates a cushion of insulation that keeps your soles away from the cold ground. Then comes the tallow. You reach for a small wooden bowl kept near the hearth. Inside is a pale, greasy substance that smells of rendered beef fat. This is tallow, and it is your primary waterproofing agent. You dip your fingers into the grease and rub it vigorously into the leather of your shoes. You pay special attention to the seams, working the fat deep into the holes made by the needle. The tallow fills the pores of the leather, creating a barrier that repels water and prevents the slush from soaking into your straw stuffing. It is a messy, stinking process, and the smell of old animal fat will cling to you all day, but it is a small price to pay for dry feet. If you are lucky, you might also have a pair of pattens. These are wooden overshoes with thick soles and leather straps. You slip your leather shoes into these wooden clogs, which lift you 2 or 3 inches off the ground. This keeps you out of the worst of the slush and protects the expensive leather of your shoes from the abrasive frozen earth. As you stand by the door, ready to face the outside world, you feel the true weight of your winter wardrobe. You are carrying several pounds of fabric and grease. Your movements are restricted, and your sense of smell is dominated by the scent of sheep and tallow. But you are warm. You have spent months preparing for this moment, from the shearing of the sheep in the spring to the spinning and weaving of the autumn. Every stitch you see in your clothing is a memory of a quiet hour spent by the fire. You open the door, and the winter landscape hits you. The world is a blinding expanse of white and gray. The wind rushes toward you, looking for any gap in your armor. It searches for a loose seam at your wrist or an opening at your throat. But your layers hold. The felted wool of your hood deflects the breeze, and the tallow on your boots keeps the damp at bay. You are a walking fortress of fiber, a testament to the fact that even in an age before synthetic fabrics and heated homes, the human spirit found a way to thrive. You step out into the snow, the crunch of the frozen ground muffled by your tallow-soaked soles, ready to face the long, cold day ahead. The sun is a pale disk in the sky, offering no heat, but the warmth you carry with you is enough. It is the warmth of the flock, the warmth of the flax field, and the warmth of the countless hours of labor that have turned simple thread into a shield for your life. The sun is a pale, weak ghost of itself. You stand at the threshold of your cottage, looking out across the village as the afternoon light begins to fail long before you feel it should. It is not even 4 o'clock, yet the shadows are stretching long fingers across the frozen mud of the lane. In the medieval world, darkness is not just an absence of light. It is a presence. It is a weight that settles over the thatched roofs and the dormant fields, bringing with it a deep, ancestral anxiety. This is the winter solstice, the shortest day and the longest night of the year. For you, a peasant living in the heart of the Middle Ages, this is the pivot point of the universe. If the sun does not return, if the days do not begin to lengthen again, then everything you have worked for is for naught. Your survival depends on the cycle of the seasons, and right now, it feels as though the world is teetering on the edge of a permanent night. You step back inside and pull the heavy wooden door shut, dropping the bar into place with a hollow thud. The interior of your home is thick with the smell of wood smoke, dried herbs, and the damp wool of your family's cloaks. The fire in the central hearth is the heartbeat of your world. On this night, more than any other, that fire must not go out. This is not merely about warmth anymore. It is about spiritual defense. To the medieval mind, the boundaries between the physical world and the supernatural world are never thinner than they are during the winter solstice. The long nights are a time when the veil is lifted, and the spirits of the dead, the demons of the air, and the ancient powers of the earth are free to roam. You look toward the corner of the room where a massive piece of timber lies. This is the Yule log. It is not just a piece of firewood. You and your son spent hours selecting it weeks ago, choosing a thick, sturdy trunk of oak or ash. You hauled it from the woods with a sense of ceremony, and it has been drying by the wall, waiting for this specific moment. Tonight, you will bring it to the hearth. Lighting the Yule log is a ritual that connects you to your ancestors and to the very sun itself. You use a small, charred piece of wood kept from last year's log to start the fire. This creates a continuous chain of light and protection that stretches back through the generations of your family. As the flames take hold of the fresh wood, you feel a momentary surge of relief. The light dances on the soot-stained walls, pushing the shadows back into the corners. The Yule log is expected to burn for the full 12 days of the Midwinter Festival. If it goes out early, it is a sign of terrible luck for the coming year. You will stay up late into the night watching the embers, making sure the fire is healthy. The ashes from this fire are sacred. Once the festival is over, you will gather them carefully. You will scatter some in your fields to ensure a good harvest, and you will keep some in a pouch under your bed. They are believed to protect the house from lightning and fire, and some even say they can cure an internal ailment if mixed with a bit of ale. In a world without medicine or insurance, these rituals are your only way to exert control over a chaotic and dangerous environment. But the fire is only part of your defense. You look up at the rafters and the doorframe. You have decorated them with branches of holly, ivy, and boxwood. To you, these are not just festive decorations. These are symbols of life that refuses to die. While the great oaks and elms stand bare and skeletal in the woods, the holly remains stubbornly, vibrantly green. Its bright red berries are like drops of blood against the snow, a reminder that the life force of the earth is still flowing, even when the ground is frozen solid. You believe that these evergreens provide a refuge for the tiny, helpful spirits of the woods who might otherwise perish in the frost. By bringing them into your home, you are inviting the blessing of nature to stay with you through the coldest months. There is a particular reverence for the mistletoe as well. You have hung a bunch of it high up, away from the reach of the children. It is a strange plant, growing not in the soil but high in the branches of other trees, suspended between heaven and earth. It is considered a plant of great peace. It is said that if enemies meet beneath the mistletoe in the forest, they must lay down their arms and observe a truce until the following day. In the cramped, tense environment of a winter cottage where nerves are frayed and tempers are short, the mistletoe serves as a silent reminder of the need for harmony within the family. As the night deepens, the wind begins to howl through the thatch. You huddle closer to the fire, and you notice your children moving closer to you as well. They have heard the stories of the wild hunt. This is the time of year when the phantom hunters are said to gallop across the sky on coal-black horses, accompanied by yelping hounds with eyes of fire. Some say the hunt is led by an ancient, pagan god like Odin or Woden. Others say it is led by the spirits of wicked kings or even the devil himself. To hear the baying of those hounds in the wind is an omen of death or disaster. You tell your children to stay quiet and keep their eyes on the fire. You believe that if a traveler is caught outside when the wild hunt passes, they might be swept up into the air and forced to ride with the ghosts forever. This blend of old pagan customs and Christian faith is the hallmark of your life. The Church has taught you that this is the season of the birth of Christ, the light of the world. You attend the midnight Mass, walking through the freezing dark to the stone church where the candles flicker against the cold air. You hear the Latin chants and you see the priest in his finest robes. To you, there is no conflict between the stories of the Bible and the rituals of the Yule log. They are all parts of the same struggle between light and dark, life and death. The birth of the Savior at the darkest time of year is a powerful image that makes sense to you. Confirms what your eyes tell you every morning when you look for the sun. Hope is born when the world is at its coldest. The solstice also marks the beginning of a brief period of rest. The heavy labor of the harvest is long over, and the frantic preparations of the autumn have reached their end. For 12 days, the social order of the village shifts. This is the time of misrule. In some manor houses, a commoner might be appointed as the Lord of Misrule, given the power to lead the revels and mock the pomposity of the lords and priests. It is a necessary release of pressure. You might join your neighbors for a session of wassailing. You gather in a group, carrying a large bowl of warmed ale flavored with spices and roasted apples. You go from house to house, and even to the orchards, singing loudly to wake up the trees and frighten away the demons. The word wassail comes from the old greeting meaning be healthful. You offer a drink to your neighbors, and they offer one to you. It is a moment of communal defiance against the isolation of winter. In the flickering light of your hearth, you share a special meal. It might only be a bit of salted pork that you have been saving, or a loaf of bread made with the finest white flour you could afford, but tonight it tastes like a feast. You might even have a small amount of honey to sweeten a porridge. You talk about the ancestors, telling stories of your grandfather who survived the Great Flood, or your aunt who was known for her skill with the loom. By speaking their names, you keep them alive in the room with you. You are part of a long, unbroken chain. As the fire begins to settle into glowing coals, you feel a sense of profound stillness. Outside, the world is locked in ice. The birds are silent, and the streams are hushed. But inside, there is the crackle of the oak and the warmth of your kin. You know that tomorrow the sun will rise just a few seconds earlier than it did today. It will be too small a change for your eyes to see, but your heart will know it. The wheel has turned. The darkness has reached its limit, and it has been forced to retreat. You have survived the shortest day, and though many weeks of bitter cold lie ahead, the promise of the light has been renewed. You bank the fire with ash to keep the core hot until morning. Wrap yourself in your heavy woolen blankets and close your eyes. The spirits may howl in the wind, but for tonight, the hearth is secure, the evergreens are bright, and the light is returning to the world. You pull your woolen cloak tighter around your shoulders, but the chill of the cottage still seeps into your bones. Outside, the world is a landscape of jagged ice and skeletal trees, but inside, the air is thick with a different kind of heaviness. It is a smell that defines every winter of your life. It is the scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and the bubbling, earthy aroma of the potage pot. You stand over the hearth, watching the iron cauldron that hangs from a blackened metal crane. This pot is the beating heart of your home. In the summer, it might be pushed to the side, but in the depths of winter, it never truly cools. It is a permanent fixture, a bubbling reservoir of life that simmers from dawn until the last embers fade at night. To understand how you survive these brutal months, you must understand what is inside that pot. It is not a recipe in a book, and it is not a fixed meal. It is a continuous, evolving stew that transforms based on whatever scraps you have left in your larder. You take a wooden spoon, its handle worn smooth by generations of hands, and give the mixture a slow stir. The liquid is thick and grayish-brown, swirling with the ghosts of yesterday's meal and the promise of today's. This is potage. It is the ultimate survival food. It is cheap, filling, and designed to squeeze every possible calorie out of the meager resources you manage to squirrel away during the harvest. In your world, grain is gold, but you do not just eat bread. Bread requires a communal oven, a baker, and a heavy fee paid to the lord of the manor. Potage, however, belongs to you. You begin the base with water or, if you are lucky, a thin, sour ale. Into this, you throw a handful of dried peas and beans. You remember picking these in the late summer heat, shelling them until your fingers were raw, and drying them in the sun until they were hard as pebbles. Now, in the dead of winter, those pebbles are your lifeline. They bob in the boiling water, slowly softening over hours of heat, releasing their proteins and starches to thicken the broth. Next, you add the grains. This is not the fine white flour of the nobility. You use whole grains of barley, rye, or oats. They provide a nutty, chewy texture that makes the soup feel like a solid meal. As they cook, they swell, absorbing the liquid and turning the potage into something closer to a porridge than a soup. This thickness is intentional. A thin broth will leave your stomach growling before the sun has even set, but a thick, grain-heavy potage will sit heavy in your belly, providing a slow release of energy to help you endure the physical labor of hauling wood through the snow. You look toward the corner of the room where the root vegetables are stored. You reach for a couple of wrinkled onions and a handful of leeks. Their skins are papery and dry, but inside, they hold the sharp, pungent flavors that keep the potage from being entirely bland. You chop them roughly and toss them in. If there are any parsnips or carrots left in the straw-lined pit beneath the floorboards, you add those too. They bring a faint sweetness to the pot, a reminder of the garden that now lies buried under 2 feet of frost. But what about meat? You glance up at the rafters. Hanging there is a small, shriveled piece of bacon fat and a single slab of salt pork. This is your treasure. You do not cut a thick slice for yourself. That would be unthinkable. Instead, you shave off a tiny portion, no larger than your thumb, and drop it into the boiling water. As it renders, the fat rises to the surface in golden droplets. This fat is more important than the meat itself. It provides the dense calories your body craves to maintain its temperature in a house where the walls are made of wattle and daub and the windows are nothing more than shuttered holes. That tiny bit of pork flavors the entire pot, giving the beans and grains a savory richness that makes you close your eyes in appreciation. On the darkest days, when the larder is truly bare, the potage becomes a thin, watery shadow of itself. You might find yourself adding handfuls of dried herbs gathered months ago, such as parsley, sage, or savory, just to give the water some character. You might even add wild greens if you were able to forage and dry them before the first frost. Everything goes into the pot. Nothing is wasted. Even the bones from a rare rabbit or a piece of tough mutton are boiled and reboiled until they are bleached white, surrendering every last bit of marrow and collagen to the liquid. You take a bowl, a simple wooden vessel, and ladle the steaming mixture into it. The heat of the bowl warms your palms instantly, but you do not eat it alone. Next to the pot sits a loaf of bread. This is not fresh, fluffy bread. It is 4 days old, dark, and hard enough to break a tooth. This is the trencher bread. You cut a thick slice and place it at the bottom of your bowl, or perhaps you use the bread itself as the plate. You pour the hot potage directly onto the bread. As you wait for a moment, you watch the bread soak up the liquid. This is a critical part of the meal. The hard, stale bread softens, becoming easy to chew, while simultaneously acting as a sponge for the precious fats and juices of the stew. Every crumb is accounted for. By the time you finish the liquid, the bread at the bottom has become a savory, saturated treat. You sit on a low stool near the fire, the only source of light in the room. The flickering orange glow casts long, dancing shadows against the walls. As you eat, you feel the warmth spreading from your throat down into your chest. It is more than just nutrition. In the middle of a brutal winter, a hot meal is a psychological shield against the despair of the cold. It represents the fact that you prepared well, that your family has managed to outlast the turning of the seasons so far. You think about the science of this meal, though you would not call it that. You just know that it works. The combination of legumes and grains creates a complete protein, giving you the strength to keep your livestock alive and your hearth burning. The slow cooking process breaks down the tough fibers of the vegetables and the hard outer shells of the grains, making them easy for your body to process. In an age where every calorie is a hard-won victory, the potage pot is your greatest weapon. As you scrape the last bit of softened bread from the bottom of your bowl, you look back at the cauldron. It is not empty. It is never truly empty. You add a bit more water and a few more handfuls of grain, setting it back over the low heat to begin the process for tomorrow. This is the perpetual stew. Some say that in certain houses, the pot has been simmering for weeks, with new ingredients constantly hiding the remnants of the old. It is a cycle of survival, a constant renewal of life in a season that feels like death. You hear the wind whistle through the thatch above your head, a reminder of the frozen world waiting just outside your door. You know that many people in the village are struggling. You know that as February approaches, the beans will run low and the onions will begin to rot. The potage will grow thinner. The golden droplets of fat will become more frequent memories than daily realities. But for tonight, the pot is full. The steam is rising. The heavy, earthy smell fills the small room, masking the scent of damp wool and old straw. You lean back, feeling the weight of the meal in your stomach. It is a humble, simple way to live, but there is a profound sense of security in that bubbling iron pot. It is the boundary between you and the starvation that haunts the winter woods. As long as you have a handful of grain, a few dried peas, and a fire to boil the water, you can face the frost. You close your eyes, the warmth of the hearth and the fullness of the potage finally allowing you to drift into a heavy, much-needed sleep. The winter is long, but tonight you have eaten. And in the medieval winter, that is the greatest victory of all. You feel the weight of the timber door before you even pull the latch. It is heavy, resisting your strength with a stubborn, frozen pressure that was not there when you went to sleep. You lean your shoulder against the wood and shove. There is a sharp, grinding sound of ice snapping, and then a wall of white spills across the threshold, tumbling over your boots and onto the dirt floor of your hut. You step outside, and the world you knew yesterday has simply ceased to exist. This is the white silence. In the medieval world, a blizzard is not just a weather event. It is a transformation of reality. The familiar landmarks of your village, the low stone walls, the well, the path to your neighbor's cottage, and even the giant oak tree at the edge of the common field, have all been erased. Everything is a uniform, blinding white. The sky and the earth have fused together into a singular, swirling void. You can no longer tell where the ground ends and the horizon begins. You take one step forward, and your leg sinks up to the hip. The cold is not a slow creep. It is an immediate, violent assault. It bites through your wool hosen and stings your skin like 1,000 needles. In this moment, you realize that if you wander more than 20 paces from your door without a plan, you could die. People in your village tell stories of men who went out to fetch a pail of water and were found 3 days later, frozen solid, only 10 feet from their own front doors. This is the lethality of the medieval blizzard. It is a disorienting, suffocating trap that turns 100 square yards of farmland into a trackless, lethal wilderness. Navigation in this environment is a matter of touch and memory rather than sight. You reach back and feel for the rope you and your father tied to the doorframe before the storm reached its peak. This hemp line is your umbilical cord. It runs from your dwelling to the barn where your livestock are shivering. Without this rope, you would be lost in seconds. The wind picks up, a howling, shrieking gale that carries the fine, dry snow like dust. It gets into your eyes, your nose, and your mouth. It muffles every sound. You could shout for help, and your voice would be swallowed by the gale before it reached the next house over. You begin to pull yourself along the rope hand over hand. Your mittens, made of thick, boiled wool, are already becoming encrusted with ice. You have to keep moving. If you stop, the heat will leave your body in a frantic rush. You think about the science of what is happening to you, though you would not call it science. You would call it the humors of the body retreating to the core. Your heart is pumping blood away from your frozen fingers and toes, trying to protect your internal organs. You feel a strange, sluggish heaviness in your limbs. This is the danger zone. When the shivering stops and the warmth starts to feel like a distant memory, the white silence starts to feel comfortable. It starts to feel like a bed. You cannot let that happen. You reach the barn, and the relief of feeling the rough, frozen planks of the side wall is immense. You find the latch, clear the ice with a small iron pick you carry in your belt, and slip inside. The air in here is thick with the smell of manure, old hay, and the warm, wet breath of the cows. For a medieval peasant, this is the most beautiful smell in the world. It means life. You check the animals, checking their water troughs to make sure they have not frozen solid. You break the ice with a mallet, the rhythmic thud echoing in the small, dark space. The animals look at you with wide, dark eyes. They feel the storm too. They know that they are just as vulnerable as you are. But the journey is only half over. You have to get back. You look out the barn door, and the world has become even more obscured. The wind has shifted, and now the snow is drifting in massive, undulating waves. These drifts are the great deceivers of the medieval winter. A drift might look like solid ground, but it could be covering a ditch or a well. If you fall in, the weight of the snow above you can crush your chest, making it impossible to draw a breath. As you navigate back toward the cottage, you think about the folklore of the blizzard. To your mind, this is not just wind and water. This is the breath of the giants or the movement of the wild hunt across the sky. You imagine spirits riding the gale, looking for the souls of those who wander too far from the hearth. The psychological pressure of the white silence is as heavy as the snow itself. The isolation is absolute. You are 20 miles from the nearest town and perhaps only 50 yards from your nearest neighbor. But in this storm, you are as alone as a man on the moon. You reach your door and fall inside, gasping for air that does not feel like liquid ice. Your family is there, huddled around the small fire. The smoke from the peat hangs low in the room because the heavy snow on the thatch roof is blocking the ventilation. This is another danger. If the snow piles too high, the weight can snap the rafters, or the smoke can turn the interior into a suffocating trap. You look up at the ceiling, watching for the slight sag of the timber. Every few hours, someone must go out and use a long wooden pole to knock the accumulation off the eaves. It is a never-ending cycle of labor. Your cloak is now a stiff, frozen board. You hang it near the fire, watching as the ice turns to steam. The dampness fills the room, adding to the smell of smoke and unwashed bodies. You sit down and the exhaustion hits you. Navigating a blizzard is a physical feat equivalent to running a marathon. Every step requires lifting your entire body weight out of a drift. Every breath is a struggle against the pressure of the wind. You listen to the sound of the storm hitting the walls. It sounds like someone is throwing handfuls of sand against the wood. You wonder about the others in the village. Did the widow in the small hut at the end of the lane manage to gather enough firewood? Did the priest make it back from the manor house? You will not know until the wind dies down. In the medieval winter, the blizzard is a period of forced waiting. You are a prisoner of the weather. You cannot work the fields, you cannot hunt, and you cannot travel. You can only maintain the small perimeter of your survival. You take a piece of hard, dark bread and soften it in a bowl of thin pottage. The warmth of the liquid spreading through your chest is the first time you have felt truly human since you opened the door this morning. You realize that your survival depends on a series of small, mundane choices. Did you check the rope? Did you sharpen the ice pick? Did you reinforce the barn door? In the white silence, there is no room for error. A single mistake, a single moment of overconfidence, and the snow will claim you. The storm continues for 3 days. By the second day, the windows are completely covered, and the only light comes from the flickering orange glow of the hearth. The passage of time becomes blurred. You sleep when you are exhausted, and you eat when the hunger becomes a sharp pain. You tell stories to the children to drown out the howling of the wind, stories of brave knights or saints who survived the wilderness. You are building a mental wall against the cold. When the wind finally stops, the silence that follows is even more profound than the noise of the gale. You push open the door, which is now buried halfway up. You climb out into a world that has been sculpted into new, strange shapes. The village is a series of white mounds with thin ribbons of blue smoke rising into a cold, clear sky. You see your neighbor doing the same, poking his head out from a drift like a marmot. You wave to each other, a simple gesture that carries the weight of a profound victory. You have navigated the white silence, and you are still here. The blizzard has passed, but it has left a landscape that will take weeks to tame. A world of ice that requires constant vigilance until the first true thaw of spring. You step out of your door and the first thing you notice is not the cold, though it bites at your skin with a renewed ferocity. It is the silence. It is a heavy, physical thing that seems to press against your ears. In the summer, even in the middle of the night, there is the sound of insects, the rustle of leaves, or the distant barking of a dog from the next manor over. In the autumn, you can hear the creak of cartwheels on the road and the shouting of teamsters bringing the harvest to market. But now, as the heart of winter takes hold, the world has gone mute. The roads, which were the lifeblood of your small universe, have effectively ceased to exist. You look toward the horizon, where the main track leads away from your village toward the market town. In your mind, you can see it clearly, a winding path of packed dirt and stone that connects you to the rest of Christendom. But your eyes see something else entirely. The road has been swallowed. Where there used to be a clear boundary between the fields and the path, there is now only an undulating sea of white. The snow has drifted so high in some places that it reaches the tops of the stone walls. In other places, the wind has blown the ground bare, revealing a surface of mud that has frozen into iron-hard ruts. These ruts are like jagged teeth, capable of snapping a wagon axle or breaking the leg of a plow horse in a single misstep. This is the reality of the frozen arteries. During a medieval winter, the infrastructure of the world simply breaks down. We often think of the Middle Ages as a time when people stayed in one place, but that is a bit of a myth. Even a humble peasant like you is part of a massive, sprawling network of trade and communication. You need the salt merchant to bring minerals from the coast to preserve your meat. You need the ironmonger to bring scrap metal or new tools. You need the peddler who carries needles, thread, and the occasional bit of news from the royal court. When the roads freeze, that network snaps. You walk a few paces toward the village center, and your boots crunch loudly on the crust of the snow. You realize that for the next month, perhaps longer, your world has shrunk to the distance you can walk in a single afternoon and still return before the sun sets. The sun is a pale, weak thing now, hanging low in the sky, providing light but no warmth. It will be gone by mid-afternoon, and when the darkness falls, the isolation will become absolute. Think about the merchant who was supposed to arrive last week. Perhaps he is hunkered down in a roadside inn miles away, watching his profits disappear as he pays for room and board for himself and his pack horses. Or perhaps he was caught on the open road when the last blizzard hit. You have heard the stories of travelers found weeks after a storm, huddled together in the lee of a haystack, frozen into statues of ice. To travel in this weather is to gamble with your life. The landmarks you usually rely on, the specific oak tree, the peculiar rock formation, the small wooden shrine at the crossroads, are all disguised by the snow. It is terrifyingly easy to lose the path, wander into a ditch, and simply run out of energy as the hypothermia begins its slow, seductive work on your mind. But it is not just the roads that have failed. You walk down toward the edge of the river, the great highway of the medieval world. In the warmer months, this water is busy with flat-bottomed barges carrying grain, timber, and stone. It is the fastest way to move heavy goods. But today the river is a jagged, broken mess. The flow has slowed to a crawl, and thick plates of ice have formed along the banks, reaching out like fingers to choke the center of the stream. In a truly brutal winter, the river might freeze solid enough to walk across, but that is a deceptive blessing. The ice is never as thick as it looks. One weak spot, one pocket of trapped air, and a man or a horse can vanish into the black, freezing water in an instant, swept away beneath the ice sheet where no one can reach them. With the river blocked, the mills have stopped. You can hear the lack of that constant, low, thrumming sound of the water while hitting the current. Without the mills, there is no flour being ground. If you did not get your grain processed before the deep freeze, you are left with hard kernels that must be laboriously crushed by hand with a mortar and pestle in your own cold kitchen. This is the grinding physical cost of the frozen arteries. Every task takes longer. Every resource is harder to come by. As you stand by the frozen bank, you realize that the isolation is not just about goods. It is about information. In the summer, news travels at the speed of a galloping horse or a briskly walking messenger. You know if there is a war in the south, or if the king has died, or if a new tax has been levied. But now you know nothing beyond what your neighbors tell you over the fence. The world could be falling apart 50 miles away, and you would not hear of it until the spring thaw. This creates a strange, claustrophobic psychological pressure. You and your village are an island in a white ocean. If your stores run low, if a fire breaks out, or if a sickness begins to move from house to house, there is no one to call for help. No one is coming. You turn back toward the village, thinking of the items you take for granted. Salt is the most critical. Without it, the meat you slaughtered in the autumn will rot. If the salt merchant was delayed by the snow, the village will face a quiet, desperate crisis. Then there is the matter of wax and tallow. As the days grow shorter, you need more candles to see inside your windowless hut. If the trade routes are closed, the price of tallow rises, and you are forced to spend your evenings in total darkness, huddled near the dying embers of the hearth, saving your last candle for a true emergency. Even the church, the center of your spiritual life, feels the strain. The priest might be running low on the wine needed for the Mass, or the oil for the lamps that are supposed to burn eternally before the altar. Everything is finite. Everything is dwindling. You look at your own hands, chapped and red from the cold, and you realize that even the tools you use are at risk. If your axe head snaps while you are chopping wood, you cannot simply go to the market and buy another. The blacksmith may have no coal left to fire his forge because the charcoal burners could not get their sleds through the forest. You would have to borrow from a neighbor or try to make do with a dull, broken blade until the world opens up again. This period of the winter is often called the hungry gap, but it is also the lonely gap. You feel the absence of the wandering friars who bring stories of saints and far-off lands. You miss the tinkers who would fix your pots and pans in exchange for a bowl of pottage. The social fabric of the kingdom is held together by movement, and when movement stops, the fabric begins to fray. You are left with only your family and your immediate neighbors, and by this point in the season, tempers are often as short as the daylight. You see a figure moving in the distance, a dark shape against the white. For a moment, your heart leaps with the hope that it might be a traveler, someone with news or goods. But as the figure gets closer, you see it is just old Thomas, the shepherd, struggling to move a few of his sheep to a more sheltered spot. He is bundled in so many layers of wool and hide that he looks more like a bear than a man. You wave, and he raises a gloved hand in a stiff greeting, but neither of you speaks. The air is too cold to waste breath on idle talk, and the wind would only carry your words away. You head back toward your cottage, the smoke from your chimney rising straight up in the still, frigid air. You think about the pilgrims who might be trapped in monasteries along the mountain passes, or the sailors whose ships are locked in the harbor ice in the great ports to the east. The whole world is holding its breath. The frozen arteries have turned the continent into a collection of tiny, isolated cells. You are safe for now as long as your roof holds and your fuel lasts, but you feel the weight of the silence. It is a reminder that despite all your hard work and your place in a great kingdom, you are ultimately at the mercy of the seasons. Until the ice cracks and the mud softens, your horizon is no further than the edge of the woods, and your world is only as large as the heat from your fire. You step out from your cottage into a world that has been erased by the night. A fresh layer of snow has fallen, thick and heavy, turning the familiar contours of your village into a landscape of soft, white humps and deep, deceptive shadows. The air is so cold that it feels sharp in your nostrils, and every breath you take sends a plume of white steam billowing into the morning gloom. Your joints ache from the damp cold that has seeped through the thatch and into your bones while you slept, but there is a sound cutting through the silence that demands you move. It is the rhythmic, iron clang of a bell. It is not the frantic tolling that warns of fire or invasion, but a steady, welcoming pulse that vibrates through the frozen air. You wrap your cloak tighter, securing the wool with a bone pin, and begin the slow trudge toward the center of the village. You are not alone. From every side, you see the dark shapes of your neighbors emerging from their homes. They move like ghosts against the white ground, their heads bowed against the wind. You are all heading to the one place that offers a different kind of warmth, a place where the crushing isolation of winter is momentarily held at bay. You are going to the parish church. As you approach the stone structure, you notice how it dominates the horizon. In a world of mud and timber, the church is a mountain of masonry. Its thick walls are a testament to a power far greater than the seasonal whims of nature. For you, the church is not just a building where you go to pray. It is the communal living room of the village, the theater of your public life, and the only place where the terrifying vastness of the winter sky feels manageable. You reach the heavy oak door, studded with iron bolts, and pull it open. The transition is immediate. The howling wind is cut short by the weight of the stone, replaced by a profound silence that is layered with the scents of beeswax, old incense, and the faint, earthy smell of damp wool and rushes. Inside, the air is still cold, but it is a different kind of cold. It is a dry, still chill that feels respectful rather than predatory. There are no pews yet in this era. The nave, the long central hall of the church, is a wide, open space. You find your place standing or kneeling on the floor, which is covered in a fresh layer of straw or dried rushes to keep the dampness of the earth from freezing your feet. You look around at the faces of your neighbors. In the dim light of a few flickering candles, you see the toll the winter has taken. Some faces are thinner than they were at harvest time. Some eyes are shadowed with the grief of a child lost to the lung fever that haunts the winter months. But as the priest begins the service, a sense of collective identity begins to settle over the room. You are no longer a solitary family huddling by a dying fire. You are a congregation. You are part of a story that stretches back to the beginning of time and forward into eternity. The spiritual warmth of the church comes from the way it structures your winter. Without the church, the months between November and March would be a featureless void of hunger and darkness. But the liturgical calendar transforms this survival period into a series of meaningful milestones. You have just moved through the somber, expectant days of Advent, a time of fasting that mirrored the dwindling supplies in your larder. Now, you find yourself in the heart of the winter feast cycle. The 12 days of Christmas are not just a religious observation but a vital social release valve. During these days, the strict hierarchies of your world are softened. You might participate in the Feast of Fools or watch the boy bishop take his temporary throne, laughing as the world is turned upside down for a few hours. These rituals provide a psychological warmth that is as necessary as any fire. They remind you that while the world outside is frozen and dead, the inner life of the community is vibrant and defiant. You lift your gaze to the walls. In your own home, the walls are soot-stained daub and wattle, but here, they are a riot of color. Even in the dim winter light, the murals that cover the stone come alive. You see the story of the Nativity with a very human Mary and a very sturdy Joseph, placed in a setting that looks remarkably like your own county. You see the lives of the saints, men and women who endured unimaginable cold and suffering but emerged into the golden light of heaven. And, most importantly, you see the Great Doom painting above the chancel arch. It depicts the Last Judgment, with the scales of justice weighing souls. To a modern observer, it might seem terrifying, but to you, it is a source of profound comfort. It promises that the hardships you endure now, the unfairness of the cold, and the greed of a harsh Lord will all be accounted for. It gives your winter suffering a purpose. It suggests that the physical world is merely a thin veil, and just beyond it is a realm of eternal summer. The priest speaks in Latin, a language you do not understand, but the music of the words is familiar. The chanting rises into the vaulted ceiling, carrying your unspoken prayers with it. You pray for the cow that is struggling to birth her calf in the freezing barn. You pray for the grain in the pits, that it might not rot before the thaw. You pray for the soul of the neighbor who didn't survive the first hard frost of December. As you pray, you feel the physical presence of the people around you. The huddling together for warmth is both a practical necessity and a spiritual act. In the nave of the church, the boundaries between the rich and the poor, while still present, are blurred by the shared reality of the season. The lord of the manor may have a private gallery, but he breathes the same chilled air as you, and he bows his head before the same altar. This sense of community extends beyond the service itself. The church is where you hear the news. In a time when your world has shrunk to the size of your village, the church is your window to the outside. You learn which roads are impassable, which nearby villages are suffering from sickness, and what the king's tax collectors are planning for the spring. It is also the center of charity. The tithes collected during the harvest are now being redistributed to those who have nothing left. You might see the priest handing out loaves of blessed bread or small portions of dried peas to the widows and the orphaned. This is the safety net of the medieval world. It is thin and it is fragile, but it is held together by the stone walls of the parish. As the service ends and you prepare to step back out into the blinding white of the courtyard, there is a final ritual that marks the turning of the season. You look forward to Candlemas in early February. This is the day when everyone brings their candles to the church to be blessed. You will stand in the nave, hundreds of small flames flickering in the shadows, creating a sea of light that defies the winter gloom. It is a celebration of the purification of the Virgin, but for you, it is also a celebration of the returning sun. Each candle taken back to a cottage is a piece of the church's warmth, a physical reminder that the light is winning its battle against the dark. You push open the heavy door and the winter wind rushes in to meet you, but you feel fortified. The spiritual warmth you have gathered within the stone walls acts as an invisible cloak. You have been reminded that you are not forgotten by God or by your neighbors. You walk back toward your small, smoke-filled cottage with a sense of perspective. The ice may still be thick on the pond, and the woodpile may be getting low, but the church has told you that spring is an inevitability. It has given you the stories, the songs, and the shared bread that you need to survive until the first green shoots break through the melting snow. As you reach your door, you hear the church bell one last time, a fading echo that tells you that even in the heart of a brutal winter, you are part of a living, breathing, and hopeful world. You step inside and pull the heavy latch shut, but the cold seems to follow you through the cracks in the door like a living thing. It is February now, the month your ancestors called the Hunger Moon, and for good reason. The festive spirit of Christmastide is a distant, fading memory. The woodpile outside is a skeletal shadow of its former self, and the air inside your small Cruck cottage smells of damp earth, old smoke, and the sharp, metallic scent of true winter. You look toward the corner where your winter stores are kept, and for a moment you hesitate to even look at the barrels. To look too closely at your remaining grain is to confront the terrifying math of survival. This is the season of the great thinning. Everything around you is shrinking. The days are still short, though the light lingers just a few minutes longer each evening, a cruel promise that spring is coming but is not yet here. Your own body feels different. You can feel the sharp points of your hip bones and the way your wool tunic hangs more loosely around your shoulders than it did in November. This is not just about you, though. You look at your family huddled near the hearth, their faces pale in the flickering amber light, and you realize that your primary job for the next 6 weeks is not farming or building, but the careful, agonizing management of what little is left. You walk over to the grain chest. This is the heart of your home, the wooden vault that holds your life. When you lift the lid, the hollow sound of the wood echoing tells you more than your eyes ever could. The pile of rye and barley is low. You can see the bottom of the chest in several places. You take a wooden scoop and let the grains trickle through your fingers. They are dusty and cool. In your mind, you are performing a silent, frantic calculation. If you bake 2 loaves of bread a week instead of 3, and if you supplement the morning pottage with more water and fewer leaks, you might make it to the first harvest of wild greens in April. But if the frost lingers, or if the grain turns moldy from the damp, those calculations will fail. The medieval winter is a game of patience and deprivation. You have already eaten the best parts of your stores. The choice cuts of salted pork that you prepared back in the autumn are long gone. What remains hanging from the rafters is the tough, gristle-heavy bacon and the dried fish that has become as hard as a piece of oak. To eat this fish, you must first wrap it in a damp cloth and beat it with a wooden mallet for several minutes just to break the fibers enough to make it chewable. It is a loud, rhythmic thudding that fills the small room, a sound that your children have come to associate with the meager meals of late winter. You move to the iron pot hanging over the fire. This is the center of your world. The pottage is the foundation of every meal, a thick stew that is never truly finished, only replenished. Today, it is mostly dried gray peas and a handful of withered onions. There is no fresh meat. You might have a bit of suet or a scrap of animal fat to drop in, which adds a much-needed layer of calories, but the flavor is dull and repetitive. You find yourself dreaming of the taste of fresh summer berries or the bite of a crisp apple. But those are fantasies from a different world. Now your palate is accustomed to the taste of salt and the earthy, slightly fermented tang of old grain. As the master or mistress of the house, you must be a disciplined warden. You see your youngest child looking at the breadboard, and you have to be the one to say no. It is a quiet, heavy kind of cruelty, but it is born of love. If you eat well today, you will starve in 3 weeks. This is the psychological burden of the hunger moon. You are surrounded by people you love, and you are the one who must enforce the rationing. You watch the candle stub burn down, knowing that you cannot light another one tonight. Tallow is expensive, and the fat used to make it is better used in the soup pot than as a source of light. You sit in the deepening shadows, listening to the wind howl against the thatch. In these lean weeks, you also have to worry about the quality of what you are eating. The grain at the bottom of the chest is prone to dampness. You run your hand through it, feeling for the telltale heat of rot or the distinctive smell of ergot, a fungus that can grow on rye during wet winters. You know the stories of entire villages that went mad, seeing visions and feeling their skin crawl with invisible fire after eating tainted bread. You smell the grain carefully, praying for the scent of dry straw rather than the sickly sweet aroma of decay. Every meal is a risk, but a risk you have to take. When the pottage is ready, you serve it out into wooden bowls. There is no talk of abundance. You eat slowly, scraping every bit of moisture from the wood. You notice that your movements have slowed down. You do not walk across the room, you shuffle. You do not stand if you can sit. This is your body's natural response to the deficit of calories. You are entering a state of semi-hibernation, conserving every ounce of heat and energy. Even the way you speak is different. Your sentences are shorter, your voice quieter. You are waiting. You are a vessel waiting to be refilled by the coming spring. Outside, the world is silent. The birds that stayed for the winter are few and far away. But you know that there are things to be found if you are desperate and brave enough to look. Tomorrow, if the snow crust is firm enough to walk on, you might head toward the edge of the woods. You are looking for the famine foods. You might dig beneath the snow for the roots of wild plants, or peel back the bark of certain trees to get at the inner layer. It is bitter and woody, but it provides fiber and a sense of fullness that can quiet a growling stomach for a few hours. You might even look for bird nests, hoping for an early egg, though it is likely too soon. There is also the constant, low-level tension of social survival. You know that your neighbor, Thomas, had a poor harvest last year. You wonder if his grain chest is already empty. There is a delicate balance in the village during the hunger moon. You want to be a good neighbor, and the church tells you that charity is the greatest of virtues. But how can you give a scoop of grain to another family when your own children have ribs showing through their tunics? You hear a knock at the door, and for a split second your heart hardens. You prepare a face of poverty to show whoever is there, a mask that says we have nothing to spare. But when you open the door and see a friend, you realize they are not there to beg. They have brought a small leather pouch of dried herbs, something they had hidden away, to help flavor your thin soup. This is how the village survives. Not through grand gestures, but through the tiny, secret sharing of what little remains. The night grows colder, and you move the bedding closer to the dying embers of the fire. You layer every piece of clothing you own over your family. You use old sacks, worn-out tunics, and even the dry straw from the floor to create a nest of insulation. As you lie there, feeling the warmth of your kin, you realize that the hunger moon is as much a test of the spirit as it is of the stomach. To survive this, you must believe in the invisible. You must believe that deep under the frozen mud, the seeds are still alive. You must believe that the sun, which feels so weak and pale, still has the power to bring the green back to the fields. You close your eyes and listen to the rhythmic breathing of your family. The hunger is a dull ache, a constant companion that you have learned to live with. It is not the sharp pain of an injury, but a heavy, dragging weight. You find yourself thinking of the feast you will have when the first lambs are born and the first cows begin to give milk again. You imagine the taste of fresh butter on a warm loaf of bread, the gold of the yolk of a fresh egg, the crunch of a spring onion. These thoughts are your armor. They keep the despair at bay. The wind rattles the door once more, but you are already drifting into a shallow, energy-saving sleep. You have managed the rations for another day. You have kept the fire alive. You have kept the shadows back. The hunger moon is high in the sky, cold and indifferent, but inside this small, smoky room, there is still life. There is still hope. And in the medieval winter, hope is the only thing that does not have to be rationed. You breathe in the scent of wood smoke and old wool, and you prepare yourself for the long, cold weeks that still lie between you and the first thaw of March. You sit on a low wooden stool, your knees drawn up close to the small, smoldering fire at the center of your one-room cottage. The air is thick, a heavy blanket of peat smoke, the smell of damp earth, and the lingering scent of dried onions hanging from the rafters. Outside, the world has ceased to exist in any way that matters. A great white silence has fallen over the village, buried under a drift of snow that reaches halfway up your door. You are trapped, not for an hour or a day, but potentially for weeks. This is the true test of the medieval winter. It is not just a battle of calories and warmth, but a battle for your mind. You look around the small space. Your entire world has shrunk to an area no larger than a modern living room. Within these walls, you live with your spouse, your 3 children, your elderly mother, and a cow that breathes heavily in the corner, her warmth a vital but pungent contribution to the household. There is no privacy. There is no quiet. There are no windows to look out of, save for a tiny slit covered with translucent animal bladder that lets in a gray, sickly light. You are experiencing what we might call cabin fever, but for you it is simply the long dark. The first few days of being snowed in were almost a relief. After the back-breaking labor of the harvest and the frantic preparations of late autumn, the forced idleness felt like a luxury. But now, as the sun sets at 4 in the afternoon and the shadows stretch long and hungry across the dirt floor, that luxury has turned into a weight. You feel the walls pressing in. Every cough from your child, every scratch of a mouse in the thatch, and every repetitive story told by your mother feels like a needle pricking at your patience. Mental fortitude is your only defense against the crushing boredom and the creeping despair that comes with the cold. You have to find ways to keep your spirit from flickering out like the rushlights you use sparingly to save on fat. You realize that if you sit in silence and let your thoughts wander too far into the darkness, you might start to hear things in the wind that are not there. You might start to believe that the spirits of the dead are tapping on the roof, or that the wild hunt is riding across the frozen sky just above your chimney. To stay sane, you turn to the oldest human technology of all, the spoken word. In the absence of books, screens, or even much light, your voice is your light. You begin a story. It is a story you have told 100 times before. A tale of heroes, saints, or perhaps a local legend about a hidden treasure guarded by a black dog. Your children lean in, their faces orange in the firelight. Even the cow seems to listen. As you speak, the walls of the cottage seem to expand. You are no longer trapped in a hut in the middle of a frozen wasteland. You are in a king's hall or a deep forest, or at the gates of a celestial city. Storytelling is not just entertainment for you. It is a social glue. It reminds you of who you are and where you belong in the grand tapestry of the world. You swap riddles with your brother, testing each other's wits. What runs but has no legs? What has a neck but no head? These are not just games for children. They are exercises for an idle brain, keeping the gears turning when the body has nothing to do but wait for the thaw. You also find work for your hands. Even in the dim light, your fingers know their tasks by touch. You might be whittling a new handle for a tool, or your wife might be spinning wool, the rhythmic whir of the spindle acting as a heartbeat for the room. This manual labor is vital. It provides a sense of purpose and progress when the world outside is frozen in time. You can look at the pile of finished yarn or the carved spoon and see that you have achieved something today. You have resisted the lethality of idleness. But the mental strain is always there, lurking in the corners. You feel the lack of the sun in your very bones. Modern people would call this seasonal affective disorder, but you only know it as a heaviness of the heart. You find yourself growing irritable over the smallest things. The way someone chews, the way the fire crackles, the fact that the floor is always slightly damp. This is where the medieval concept of community and family duty becomes a survival trait. You have been raised to understand that your survival depends on the person sitting next to you. If you break, if you descend into anger or madness, the whole household suffers. You learn to swallow your temper, to offer a kind word when you feel like screaming, and to find humor in the absurdity of your confinement. Laughter is a powerful weapon against the winter. You tell bawdy jokes, make fun of the local priest behind his back, and recount the most embarrassing things that happened in the village during the summer. For a moment, the cold is forgotten. The fear of the grain bin running low or the woodpile shrinking is pushed back into the shadows. Religion also plays a massive role in your mental survival. Your life is measured out in the calendar of the church. Even when you cannot reach the village church because of the snow, you carry the rituals in your heart. You say your prayers, you observe the fasts, and you look forward to the next great feast day. These markers in time give the winter a structure. It is not just one endless, blurry night. It is a series of steps leading toward the light. You count the days until Candlemas, the halfway point of winter, when the candles are blessed and the promise of spring feels just a little bit more real. The supernatural world feels very close during these long nights. You are a person of deep faith, but also deep superstition. You believe that the veil between this world and the next is thin in the winter. You might carve protective symbols into the beams of your house or hang a piece of iron over the door to keep out the creatures of the night. These rituals give you a sense of agency. In a world where you have no control over the weather, the temperature, or the length of the day, These small acts of protection make you feel like you are doing something to keep your family safe. There are moments, however, when the silence outside becomes too much. You might experience what some call the long eye, a state of staring into the fire for hours, lost in a trance. It is a form of mental hibernation. Your mind retreats inward to conserve energy. You aren't really thinking about anything. You are just existing, waiting out the storm. It is a necessary defense mechanism. If you felt the full weight of your situation every second of every day, you might not survive. As the weeks pass, you find that your sense of time begins to change. Without the sun to mark the hours, you live by the rhythm of the fire and the needs of the animals. You sleep when you are tired, you eat when you are hungry, and you work when the light allows. You become more attuned to the subtle sounds of the house. You can tell by the sound of the wind against the thatch if the temperature is dropping further or if a new storm is rolling in. Your world is small, but it is intensely focused. This period of isolation also fosters a profound sense of intimacy. You know every line on your wife's face, every inflection in your children's voices. You share a bed for warmth, your bodies pressed together under layers of wool and furs. This physical closeness is both a comfort and a challenge, but in the end, it is what keeps you human. You are not an island. You are a knot in a rope, tied tightly to the people around you. Eventually, the day will come when the air changes. It won't be warm, but the biting edge will soften. You will hear the first drips of water from the eaves. The snow will begin to settle and turn gray. When you finally manage to push open your door, the burst of fresh air will taste like wine. You will step out into the blinding white light of a February morning, blinking and dazed, like a creature emerging from a cave. You have survived. You have kept the fire burning, both in the hearth and in your mind. You are thin, you are tired, and you smell of smoke and animals, but your spirit is intact. You have weathered the long dark, and in doing so, you have proven the incredible resilience of the human soul. You walk out into the village, greeting neighbors who are also emerging from their own small worlds, and together, you begin the slow work of welcoming the spring. The morning air does not just touch your skin. It bites. It is a sharp, aggressive cold that seems to bypass your woolen tunic and your linen undershirt, sinking deep into your bones until you feel as brittle as the frozen mud beneath your boots. You stand at the edge of your village, looking toward the dark, skeletal silhouette of the great forest. In the summer, this forest is a place of shade and birdsong, a source of berries and hidden glades. But in the depths of winter, it transforms. It becomes a fortress of ice and shadows, a place where the law is as sharp as an axe and the stakes are quite literally life and death. You turn back to look at your small cottage. A thin, pathetic wisp of gray smoke is trailing from the hole in the thatch. It is a warning. Your hearth is dying. The pile of logs you spent all autumn stacking against the outer wall has dwindled to nothing but a few scraps of bark and some damp splinters. Without wood, your home will become a tomb. Without wood, there is no porridge for your children, no warmth for your joints, and no barrier against the creeping frost that turns your breath into a white ghost in the air. You grab your rope and your heaviest walking staff, and you begin the long, shivering walk toward the trees. As you approach the boundary of the woods, you are not just entering a physical space. You are entering a legal minefield. In the medieval world, the forest is not common property. It belongs to the lord of the manor, or perhaps to the king himself. Every branch, every twig, and every fallen trunk is accounted for in the great ledger of manorial rights. You are a peasant, a person of the land, and your relationship with these trees is governed by a complex set of ancient customs known as woodland rights. You have been granted the right of estover, which is the legal permission to take wood from the Lord's forest for your personal use. But this right is not an invitation to take whatever you please. It is a narrow, dangerous privilege. You know the rules by heart because you have seen what happens to those who forget them. You are allowed to take wood for fuel, which is called fireboat. You can take wood for repairing your house, known as houseboat. You can even take wood for fixing your fences, which is hayboat. But there is a catch that defines your entire morning. You are only allowed to take what you can reach without an axe. You cannot fell a standing tree. To cut down a living oak or a sturdy beech is a crime of timber theft, a high offense that could see you hauled before the manorial court, stripped of your meager possessions or worse. You are here for the deadwood. You are here for what the law describes as wood taken by hook or by crook. You reach the first stand of ancient oaks. Their branches are heavy with rime frost, looking like silver lace against the gray sky. You scan the ground, but you are not the only one who is cold. Your neighbors have been here before you. The easily gathered fallen branches are gone. To find what you need, you must push deeper into the undergrowth, where the snow lies in deep, treacherous drifts and the silence is so heavy it rings in your ears. The physical labor begins. You spot a thick, dead branch caught high in the limbs of a hazel thicket. This is where your hook comes into play. It is a long pole with a curved metal end, and you reach up, stretching your frozen muscles, trying to snag the wood. You pull with all your might. The wood groans. A shower of ice crystals falls into your eyes, stinging and blinding you. You wipe them away with a rough sleeve and pull again. Finally, with a sharp crack that sounds like a pistol shot in the still air, the branch gives way. It thuds into the snow, and you feel a small surge of triumph. It is enough for maybe 2 hours of heat. You need so much more. As you work, your ears are constantly straining. You are listening for the sound of hooves or the barking of a hound. The forest is patrolled by foresters and verdeers, men employed by the Lord to protect his assets. To some, these men are nothing more than glorified bullies. They are the enforcers of the forest law, and they have the power to ruin you. If a forester finds you with a branch that looks too clean, as if it were cut with a blade rather than broken by hand, he will accuse you of vert and venison. Vert is the crime of damaging the green wood. It is a serious charge. You imagine the forester, Robert, a man with a hard face and a warm fur cloak, watching you from the shadows. You work faster, your hands shaking not just from the cold, but from the anxiety of being caught in a place where your survival looks like a crime. The search is exhausting. You are trudging through knee-deep snow, dragging your growing bundle of wood behind you. The weight is immense. You have to bind the sticks together with lengths of twisted willow or your own rough rope, creating a faggot of wood that you must eventually hoist onto your shoulders. Your back aches, a dull, throbbing pain that settles in your lower spine. Your feet have lost all feeling, and you worry about the blackening of toes that the village elders whisper about. But you cannot stop. To stop is to freeze. To return empty-handed is to fail your family. You find a fallen birch tree, its bark white and papery. Birch is a gift in winter. Even when it is damp, the oil in the bark catches fire easily. You spend an hour breaking off the smaller limbs, your fingers raw and bleeding from the rough wood. You are careful to leave the main trunk. That is timber. That belongs to the Lord's carpenters. To touch it would be to invite a fine that would cost you your only pig. You stick to the debris, the scraps of the forest, the things the great men of the world consider trash but you consider gold. By midday, the light is already beginning to fail. The winter sun is a pale, weak disk that offers no warmth and is quickly sinking behind the horizon. Your bundle is now as heavy as a man. You squat down, sliding the rope over your forehead and chest, and with a grunt that turns into a cloud of steam, you heave the wood upward. The pressure is incredible. It feels as though the forest itself is trying to push you into the earth. You begin the walk back, your world narrowed down to the small patch of snow in front of your feet and the rhythmic sound of your own heavy breathing. Every step is a struggle of will. You think about the hearth. You think about the way the light will dance on the walls of your cottage once you get this wood home. You think about the pot of water that will finally boil, the smell of wood smoke that signifies safety. This is the reality of the medieval winter. It is not a festive season of carols and feasts for you. It is a grueling daily marathon. You are a scavenger in your own land, dancing on the edge of legality to keep the cold at bay. You pass the marker stone that denotes the boundary of the forest. You are safe now, or at least safe from the foresters. But the village is still a mile away, and the wind is picking up, whistling through the empty fields. Your legs are trembling. You see another figure in the distance, a neighbor carrying a similar load. You do not speak. You do not have the breath for it. You simply exchange a weary nod, a silent recognition of the shared burden of existence. You are both soldiers in a war against the frost. Finally, you reach your door. You drop the bundle with a heavy thud, the sound of the wood hitting the ground, the sweetest music you have heard all day. You are spent. You are bruised, hungry, and shivering uncontrollably. But as you drag the first of the birch branches inside and feed it to the dying embers, you see the first tiny orange spark catch. A flicker of flame licks the bark. A small plume of white smoke rises. And then the heat. You hold your hands toward the growing fire. They are red and cracked, but as the warmth hits them, the pain begins to recede. You have survived another day. You have navigated the complex laws of the Lord, outrun the watchful eyes of the foresters, and wrestled the fuel for your life from the frozen grip of the woods. Tomorrow you will have to do it all again. The winter is long, and the forest is vast. But for tonight, the hearth is bright, and the darkness is kept at the door. You sit by the fire, watching the wood you fought for turn into the light that keeps your world alive, knowing that in the medieval winter, every branch is a victory. You wake up one morning and something is different. It is not the light, which remains a bruised and watery gray. It is not the temperature, which still bites at your fingertips and turns your breath into a ghostly mist. It is the sound. For months, your world has been muffled, wrapped in the heavy and suffocating silence of deep snow. But today there is a rhythm, a steady and rhythmic ticking against the thatch of your roof. Drip, drip, drip. You lie still for a moment, listening to the ice as it loses its grip on the world. This is the first thaw. It is the moment every medieval soul has prayed for since the last leaf fell in autumn. But as you push back your thin wool blanket and feel the damp chill of the floor, you know that the end of winter is not a sudden burst of sunshine and flowers. It is a slow, messy, and dangerous transition. The return of the world is a transformation that will test your endurance just as much as the deep freezes did. You walk to the door of your cottage and pull it open. The air that hits your face is different. It is no longer the sharp and dry needle of midwinter. It is heavy with moisture, carries a scent you have forgotten. It is the smell of wet earth, of rotting vegetation, and of ancient, sleeping things waking up in the mud. You look out over the village and the sight is far from beautiful. The pristine white blanket of snow that covered the filth of the yard has turned into a gray and puddled slush. The roads, which were frozen solid like stone just a week ago, are becoming treacherous rivers of brown mud. You step outside, and your leather boots sink instantly into the muck. Every step is a struggle as the earth tries to pull the footwear right off your feet. This is the reality of the medieval thaw. To you, mud is not just a nuisance. It is a barrier. It makes travel nearly impossible. The wooden carts are useless now, their wheels sinking to the hubs in the soft and yielding ground. If you need to reach the mill or the church, you must navigate the edges of the paths, clinging to the frozen remains of hedges and stone walls. As you look toward the village stream, you hear a roar that was not there yesterday. The ice that choked the water has broken into jagged chunks. They swirl and crash against each other as the meltwater from the hills rushes down. This is a time of great anxiety for your community. If the thaw happens too quickly, the stream will burst its banks. You watch the water level rising toward the timber frames of the lowest houses. You know that a flood now could ruin what little grain you have left, soaking the bags and turning your precious flour into a moldy paste. Survival in the winter was about fighting the cold, but survival in the thaw is about managing the water. You turn your attention to the storehouse, and this is where the true weight of the season hits you. Historians often call this period the Hunger Gap. It is the most precarious time of the year. Your winter stores are at their lowest point. The salted pork is down to the last few rinds. The dried peas are mostly dust. The grain bins are showing the floorboards. You have survived the brutal frosts, but you have not yet reached the harvest. In fact, the harvest is months away. You look at your family and see the toll the winter has taken. Your faces are pale and drawn. Your clothes hang a bit looser on your frames. This is when the medieval peasant must become a scavenger. You walk toward the edge of the woods, looking for the very first signs of life. You are not looking for beauty. You are looking for anything green and edible. You search for the first shoots of wild garlic or the bitter leaves of dandelions. To a modern eye, these are weeds. To you, they are a miracle. They are the first fresh vitamins your body has seen in 4 months. They taste of iron and life, a sharp contrast to the bland and dusty pottage you have eaten every day since November. You see a patch of nettles beginning to poke through the dead leaves. You gather them carefully, knowing that when boiled, they will provide a soup that can wake up a tired heart. You are part of a world that is hungry. Even the birds seem louder and more desperate. You see the crows picking at the softening earth, looking for the grubs that are rising to the surface. Everything is waiting for the sun to gain strength. The animals in your small barn feel the change too. The cow, who has spent the winter standing in her own filth to stay warm, lows with a new urgency. She can smell the grass beneath the receding snow. You open the barn door to let the damp air circulate, and you see her ribcage prominent under her hide. She is weak, and you must be careful. If you put her out on the soft, wet pasture too soon, she will trample the grass into a mire, ruining the feed for the coming month. But she needs the movement. You spend your morning clearing the muck from her stall, a backbreaking task that reminds you that the season of labor has returned. The winter was a time of hunkering down, but the thaw is a time of endless, heavy work. As the sun climbs a little higher, you see your neighbors emerging from their own smoky homes. There is a strange social energy in the air. For months, you have mostly seen only the people within your own 4 walls. Now, as the village paths become passable, you gather by the church or the well. You trade stories of who made it through and who did not, You speak of the old man in the end cottage who slipped away during the last great frost, or the child who grew thin and coughed until the fever took her. There is a shared sense of relief, but it is tempered by the exhaustion you all feel. You are survivors of a war against the elements. You look toward the communal fields, the strips of land that sustain the entire village. They are currently a patchwork of gray snow and black soil. You cannot plow yet. The earth is too heavy, too sodden with water. If you tried to turn the soil now, you would only create a graveyard of clods that would bake hard like bricks when the wind changed. So you wait. You spend these days of the thaw mending what the winter broke. You sit on a bench outside your door, taking advantage of the fleeting light to sharpen your tools. You use a whetstone on the blade of your scythe and check the wooden handles of your hose for cracks. Every tool must be ready, for when the ground finally dries, there will be no time for repairs. The window for planting is narrow, and the earth waits for no one. You watch the children as they play in the melting drifts. They are less concerned with the hunger and more captivated by the change in their world. They find the first snowdrops, those small and defiant white bells that pierce through the frozen crust. To you, those flowers are a legal contract written by nature. They are the proof that the cycle is continuing. The sun is returning. The darkness is receding. In the evening, you return to your hearth. The fire is smaller now. You are trying to conserve the last of your wood, hoping that the temperatures will continue to climb. You sit in the dim light, and for the first time in months, the air in the room does not feel like a stagnant weight. You have left the door cracked open just a little. You can hear the sound of the wind, but it no longer howls with the intent to kill. It carries the sound of the rushing stream and the distant cry of a returning bird. You feel a deep, physical ache in your bones. The winter has been long, and your body is tired. But as you look at the bowl of thin soup on your table, supplemented now by those bitter wild greens you found in the woods, you feel a flicker of something more than just survival. You feel anticipation. The world is not just a place of ice and shadows anymore. It is a place of potential. Underneath the mud and the slush, the seeds you planted last autumn are beginning to stir. The roots are reaching down into the softening earth. You realize that the thaw is a bridge. It is the hardest part of the journey because you can see the destination, but you are not there yet. You are still cold, you are still hungry, and you are covered in the grime of a season spent indoors. But you are alive. You have walked through the valley of the winter and come out on the other side. As you blow out the small tallow candle and settle into your bed, the last thing you hear is that steady, rhythmic drip from the eaves. It is the sound of the clock of the world ticking forward. It is the sound of your world returning, one drop of melting ice at a time. You close your eyes, knowing that tomorrow there will be more mud, more work, and more hunger, but also more light. The winter is breaking, and you are here to see it. You push against the heavy oak door of your cottage, and for the first time in weeks, it does not groan against a drift of frozen snow. Instead, there is a soft, sucking sound as the wood pulls away from a thick layer of gray mud. You step out into the light, and the world is unrecognizable. The blinding, pristine white of midwinter has dissolved into a landscape of bruised purples, dull browns, and the startling, dark black of saturated earth. The air is no longer a blade against your throat. It is heavy, damp, and smells intensely of rot and ancient, waking soil. This is the moment you have prayed for since the first frost of November. Yet as you stand on your threshold, the relief you feel is tempered by a profound, hollow exhaustion. You look down at your hands. They are mapped with deep, blackened cracks that refuse to heal, the skin stained by soot and grease from months spent huddling over a smoky peat fire. Your joints ache with a dull, persistent throb that has become your constant companion. This is the physical reality of the medieval survivor. You have made it through the darkness, but the winter has taken its payment from your flesh and bone. You feel lightheaded, a dizzying sensation that comes from a stomach that has forgotten the weight of a full meal. For the last month, your diet has dwindled to a thin pottage of dried peas and the occasional scrap of salted bacon skin, boiled over and over to extract every last calorie. As you walk toward the center of the village, your boots sink deep into the mire. The thaw is not a clean process. It is a messy, treacherous transition. The frozen streams are bursting their banks, sending torrents of icy, silt-laden water rushing through the lanes. You see your neighbors emerging from their own smoky burrows, blinking like owls in the returning light. There is a communal silence as you look at one another. You notice who is missing. You see the widow standing alone by her gate, her husband having succumbed to a lung fever in the bitter depths of January. You see a family whose youngest child is no longer trailing behind them. In a medieval village, the end of winter is a time of quiet census. You do not ask where they are. The fresh mounds of earth in the churchyard, barely visible beneath the melting slush, provide the answer. The toll of the cold is written on every face. You notice the pale, translucent quality of your neighbor's skin and the way his gums have receded, a sign of the scurvy that haunts the late winter months when the last of the onions and leeks have long been consumed. Everyone is thinner. The sturdy, barrel-chested men who plowed the fields in autumn now look like ghosts of themselves, their tunics hanging loose over narrowed shoulders. But despite the grief and the physical frailty, there is a spark of something else. It is the grim, indomitable will to begin again. You head toward the communal barn to check on the livestock, and this is where the desperation of the season is most visible. You find the oxen standing in their stalls, their ribs jutting out like the hulls of wrecked ships. They are so weak they can barely lift their heads to greet you. During the hardest weeks, you had to make a choice between feeding your family and feeding the animals that provide your livelihood. You chose the middle path, giving the beasts just enough straw and dried mass to keep their hearts beating. Now, as the grass begins to stir beneath the mud, you and the other villagers must physically lift the weakest cows to their feet, supporting them with slings so they can find the strength to walk to the common pasture. If the animals die now, the spring plowing will fail, and the cycle of starvation will begin all over again. This period is what the elders call the hunger gap. It is the most dangerous time of the year. The stores of the previous harvest are almost entirely gone. The grain bins are empty, save for the precious seed corn that must be saved for planting at all costs. You could eat that seed and feel full for a week, but to do so would be to commit suicide for the coming year. So, you tighten your belt literally and figuratively. You turn your eyes to the woods and the hedgerows. You search for the first signs of wild garlic, the bitter dandelion greens, and the stinging nettles that provide the first fresh vitamins your body has seen in months. You gather these greens with a frantic energy, boiling them into a bright, thin soup that tastes of life itself. You spend your afternoons in the communal shed, your breath still visible in the damp air. But the work has changed. You are no longer just repairing what broke in the storm. You are sharpening the iron coulter of the plow. You are mending the harnesses with strips of cured leather. There is a rhythmic clinking of hammers and the rhythmic rasp of whetstones. This is the sound of hope. It is a busy, focused noise that drowns out the memory of the wind howling through the thatch. You talk with the other men about the state of the soil. Is it too wet to turn? Will the frost return to kill the early shoots? You debate the timing of the planting with the intensity of generals planning a campaign. In the medieval world, the calendar is not a suggestion. It is a matter of life and death. By the time the Feast of Candlemas arrives, the light has visibly returned. You join the procession to the church, carrying a beeswax candle that has been blessed. As you walk, the flame flickers but does not go out. You look at the hundreds of tiny lights bobbing in the twilight, reflecting off the standing water in the fields. It is a powerful symbol. The darkness has been defeated. You feel a surge of communal pride. Your village has survived. You have endured